right? Yeah. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Beav Brodie, and I own a successful e-commerce business. And I do vlogs and talk about entrepreneurship and e-commerce and online marketing, things like that. I also do tutorials about how to do a lot of the things that I talk about. So again, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. A lot of good information coming down the pipeline. And for the rest of you who've been watching for a while, you're like, where are you? What are you doing? Like, yeah, this is a hotel room. I'm not in my normal atmosphere. I'm on vacation. I'm down in the Florida Keys in Key West with the family. So in this video, we're going to compare the Canon M5 and the Canon M50, the pros and cons to each one, what they can and can't do, and figure out which one might be the best camera for you. So I've had the M5 for a little while now. Before this, I had an 80D, and then I got this, and I got a 6D Mark II, and then just recently they released the M50. My brother picked this up, and I'm like, yo, I'm going on vacation to Florida. I think I need to try this thing out. So I've got my hands on both of these at the same time to test them out, and I was really curious about this, mainly because of the flip out screen. The M5 has a flip out, I'm sorry, the M50 has the flip out screen, so if you're someone that's vlogging, you can see yourself in the flip out screen, versus the M50, this is where things start to get complicated. The M50 screen flips down, which it sucks, to be completely honest, but I think there's actually a pro to this as well, so bear with me and we'll get through all of it. If you're trying to vlog with a camera like this, the screen flips down, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you try to attach a tripod to it. Now when you screw the base plate, if you're using the kit lens and you take a, you know, your standard base plate that would come with like a JOBY Gorilla Pod thing like that, and you screw it on there, you cannot flip the screen down anymore. It gets interference with the base plate. The other bad part about both these cameras is with the base plate on, you can't open the battery door all the way. So you have to take the base plate off to open the battery door or access the memory card. Both of those are inside there. Speaking of the battery, these two cameras, while they're very much alike and almost the exact same platform, they take different batteries, which is really annoying because I've got a bunch of batteries for the M5 and I can't use any of them with the M50. It's just like, it's so stupid. But the battery and memory card slot are behind the door on the very bottom. And you can see here that it interferes. It would interfere if you really screw anything to the tripod mount. The door hinges right there and it pretty much interferes with all of it. So super annoying, really dumb. Now on this camera, the reason it doesn't interfere is because I'm using the Canon M to EF lens adapter, which means I can use any of the other Canon EF and EFS lenses. So if I want to put any of my big boy lenses on there, I've got a 6D Mark II with full frame lenses. I can use that with this camera. So this adapter, it's like $100 or so. And you can use that on either camera. So if you didn't want to use the kit lens, which you have a lot of limitations to using the Canon M series kit lenses, they just don't have a lot of options. There's no like fast lenses out there with like low apertures or anything. So you put the lens adapter on, and then you can use any of the other Canon lenses, EF and EFS series lenses on the M camera, which then you can use that has a tripod mount on the bottom of it. So I've got a base plate on here already. then you can put your tripod or Gorilla Pod on there or whatever, and you can flip that lens or the screen down. I've been doing this for a little while now. A lot of the videos that you guys have seen up till now have been on this camera or the 6D, but I find that it's not that bad to see if you're in frame, make sure the exposure looks good, and then talk right into the lens, and you're not terribly distracted with the screen sticking out to the side and looking at it, and it gets super awkward. I'm sure plenty of you have watched vlogs with people staring at the screen and not at the lens. It's just weird. But you can see what that looks like. You know, you get plenty of space there. Now, the other thing about the flip down lens on the M5 is it also tilts up. There's a huge pro to this too. So if you're the person that spends more time behind the camera than you do in front of the camera, it's very, very, very practical to be able to be shooting your subject directly behind the camera. Let me see if I can show you guys this, and look down at that lens or at that screen and know exactly what's going on without it kind of being off to the side at a weird angle. And it gets a little weird sometimes with the flip out screen and trying to look over here but shoot a subject in front of you, and if you've got a mic plugged in, it's kind of not perfect and you're looking at an angle. It just gets weird, you know, but you've got to make a sacrifice somewhere. So I think the way I've judged it is if you spend a majority of your time behind the camera, I prefer the tilt screen on the M5. If you spend more time in front of the camera, I prefer the flip out screen on the M50. Makes it much more ideal for vlogging. Now, that's kind of like the external features and things like that of these cameras. The specs though are very, very similar. There's a few things that the M50 does that the M5 does not. The M5 has a 24.1 megapixel APS-C crop sensor. M50 is the 24.2. They're practically the same thing. The M50 does shoot 4K. The 4K is very cropped in. It's almost a 3x crop by the time you factor in the APS-C sensor and then the 4K. You're almost 3x, so you're very zoomed in from what you would be initially. But in 4K, this does not use the dual point autofocus, which is kind of a bummer because Canon's dual point autofocus is like the best on the market. I mean, you don't get a better autofocus system than that. It's super reliable and things like that. But the 4K uses contrast autofocus, which isn't great. It hunts around a little bit. It takes much longer for it to find focus and things like that. So kind of a downside to the 4K in this camera, but it is a good sign of things to come in the future from future you know, lower model cameras. The fact that they're coming out with a camera body that's $779 that shoots 4K is a really good sign. They're very behind in the times at that. I mean, Sony's been using 4K and like everyone else shoots 4K. Your cell phone shoots 4K. Canon's been a little bit behind. But at the end of the day, I don't care about the 4K. Like most people are watching this stuff on a cell phone, on Facebook and on YouTube and Instagram, where 4K resolution isn't really like a big deal. So to me, I don't really care about the 4K on that. Now, video modes. These cameras are both great. The M5 does a little bit better in low light based on specs. Frame rates, this thing shoots 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, and 60 frames a second in 1080p. The M50 shoots 24, 30, and 60 in 1080p. It also shoots 120 frames a second, but it's only in 720p, and you have to scale that up to a 1080 timeline if you want to use 1080 for the rest of your video, but it really doesn't look bad. You're talking about 720p coming off of a sensor that's capable of 4K. It does not look bad at all. Now, the 120 frames a second doesn't use dual point autofocus either. It's almost locked. I mean, it will autofocus, but it definitely takes a second. So you have to be very, very kind of methodical in the way that you're using and shooting in 120 frames a second. It's kind of a planned shot and things like that. So play around with that. It looks super sweet. I'm going to give you guys some examples of all this stuff here in just a minute. But I want to make sure I talk about a lot of these features and pros and cons first, and then we'll get into a lot of the examples. Okay, another thing that both these cameras do is time-lapse. They both have the time-lapse features. They both have the typical Canon menu that you would expect, but in the time-lapse functions, they've got like preset time-lapse functions, and then they've got custom where you can do fixed exposure and get a little bit more creative and have some fun with it. Very cool. You can tell it like how long you want the clip to be, or how many shots and what the intervals and all that kind of stuff. Very cool. You've seen it a lot in a lot of the other Canon cameras. They both have time-lapse features, which was a big concern of mine about the M50 that I wasn't aware of or know of until I got my hands on it, because no one said anything about it. The specs didn't say anything about it, so I was kind of bummed if it was not going to have it, because I like to use that a lot. So there's that. All right, now let's get into what everybody wants to see, and that's going to be the difference between the 60 frames a second and the 120 frames a second. So let's pull down the bars and let's look at 60 frames a second.
Turn around. You can't look away, can't look away. 'Cause it's about to break, it's about to break. You better hold on tight.
Okay, now as you can see, that wasn't that bad. It slows down enough to see, to give some slow motion. It looks really cool. It's very cinematic and all that kind of stuff. But in a few of those clips, you can see it's a little choppy. I slowed it down a little bit too much, but I really wanted to kind of push the limits there. But I still think it was okay, and you can get away with some slow-mo. Now let's take a look at what 120 frames a second looks like. This is a few video clips I took before I left the office a couple days ago, and so let's pull these bars down and take a look and see what that looks like. Okay, so now as you can see at 120 frames a second, it slows down so much and it's still super smooth. And I'm sure I could slow that down even a little bit more if you really had something you wanted to capture. If you're firing a gun or something that's got a lot of speed to it and you want to really try to capture that, I'm sure you could slow it down just a hair more. But just straight out of the camera at 120 frames a second, what it does, it takes that 120 frames a second and it spits out a 30 frame a second clip. So it's just natively slowed down when you pull it off of your memory card, which is really cool. Now, as far as, and that's in 720p too. Let me remind you that this M50. So I'm almost get confused every time. The M50 with the flip out screen shoots 120 frames a second at 720p, so it's not even 1080p. I had to scale that up 150% in Premiere to get it to fill the 1080p sequence settings. So even scaled up, it does not look bad at all. I think it's perfectly acceptable for YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and things like that. And again, you know, some of those shots were on a gimbal. I'm pretty certain that there's a couple of those shots were on a gimbal, so you can see how smooth it is. You throw some warp stabilizer on that, and it's like buttery smooth, and it's super awesome. So let's take a look at the differences between like vlog style and 24 frames a second, 1080p between the two cameras, and then we'll look at what the M50 does in 4K and how much more it crops in. So there you go. Okay, so this is the M50 with the 10 to 18 lens on it. And what's nice about this in a vlog format is that, you know, I've got the screen flipped out. I can see what's in the frame, what's not in the frame. I can see that I'm like in frame. I can touch the screen to focus. I can see my family way back here behind me. I can zoom in. I know what's going on. I can like focus it on them, come back to me. It's super, super practical to have the flip out screen. So this is 24 frames a second in 1080p on the 10 to 18 lens. For vlogging, it's like the ideal setup versus the other one, the M5. The screen flips down, it's blocked and all this stuff, and I'll show you guys some examples of that here in just a minute. By the way, the keys, well, Key West, I don't know about the rest of the keys very well, but Key West in particular is a pretty cool place. So I'll show you an example of the M5 now in more of a vlog style format here in just a second. Okay, so now this is the M5. The lens, this is the kit lens, the 18 to 50 kit lens. I can't see myself. I don't even know if I'm in focus. I turned on face tracking and I'm just trusting that I'm in focus. I'm trusting you can even see me. Because this is the 18 to 50, it's much more zoomed in, I'm sure. I look way close to the camera versus what you could see before with the other lens that I was like, you could see more of what was around me, see more of me, wasn't so zoomed in. So that's kind of a disadvantage to this lens. Now the advantage to this lens is that it does go from 18 to 150. So if I wanted to zoom in on Rick's over here, I can do that. And if that's something you're into, cool. But if you're doing a lot of vlogging, like this kind of compares, these cameras I think are compared a lot for vlogging. So if you're going to be vlogging, I don't know if this is the lens for you. You might look at the 11 to 22, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in the rest of this video. But I wanted to show you guys the example of the 24 frames a second, nothing crazy, cinematic, anything like that. This is the Canon M5. All right, so now we're going to take a look and see what 4K does, how much crop it is. Again, this is about 13 mil now, so that we can look at this. Actually, I'll go as wide as I can. That is super, super wide. Edge of a suitcase, pillows. You guys remember that. We're gonna take a look at that. I'm gonna switch to 4K now. Okay, so this is 4K. Now it's got face tracking on. I'm super curious because apparently it's not dual point autofocus. It actually doesn't focus too bad. It's taking a little bit longer, but it still focuses okay. Now you can see how much it cropped in. It went from the pillow on the bed to like a suitcase over here, which like that's a lot. Now it looks great. I mean the 4K is like super crispy looking. But with that crop, like let's see what happens if I go first person. Like if I tried to vlog at 10 mil 4K, well, I could still get away with that. But it'd be a lot better if you could see more, I feel like. Anyways, capabilities are great. This is what 4K looks like on the M. What is this? M50. Yeah. Alright guys, now in short, here's my overall thing. If you're vlogging, I think legitimately that the M50 is probably one of the best cameras you can buy. Now, let's talk about price for a second. M5, body only, $979. M50, body only, $779. That's like $200 cheaper for a camera that I think has more practicality, more features, more function. This, on paper, is a slightly better camera in terms of like low light capabilities and stuff, but I would throw that feature out the window based on some of the others from this, like the flip out screen and this 120 frames a second and the 4K. So now with that said, if you're somebody that spends more time, oh, also These cameras both have in-body stabilization, by the way, which I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, and I completely forgot to. And they both have time-lapse. But if you're somebody that spends more time behind the camera, holding the camera like this and looking straight down at the screen, and being able to see what you're filming directly behind the camera, and you're spending more time behind it, I would highly recommend the M5. Now, if you're somebody that's doing more first person, like filming yourself, vlogging like this, I would opt for the M5, or I'm sorry, the M50. It's got the flip out screen. It makes it way easier. You can see what's in the frame. You can touch screen focus and all that kind of stuff. There's no guessing. You don't have to retake. You don't have to go back and watch the clip like you saw it happen. You know it's in focus. You know you're in frame. You know the other guy's in frame. Whatever it is, this is a better setup for you. Not to mention that 120. So anyways, I will leave links down in the description for all of the stuff that we talked about in this video. The cameras, the lenses, the lens adapters, all that kind of stuff. I will leave links in the description below. So guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Let me know if you want to see more gear review comparisons, what you guys should be using or what you shouldn't be using, and things like that in the future. And I'll see you in the next video.